You know, I suppose one of the things I should do one of these days is update my resume, because probably one of the more significant things that I managed is I was president of the National Research Council in Ottawa, so all of you who benefited from IRAP grants or heard of them, that was one of the programs that we ran, and it was a pretty successful program. But I wasn't really much of a bureaucrat, so I didn't spend all that long in Ottawa. But most of my life has actually been in the venture capital and private equity business, and I'm still involved with a venture capital fund here in Calgary, based in Calgary, and also a private equity fund where we invest in the Far East, Middle East money, and European money in the Far East. And we see the kinds of problems that we're talking about today in all those different locations. So let me talk then about some of the global impacts, because I do have I guess it's the privilege of traveling. Sometimes it gets a little tiring, but I think I've been to most of those places where there are red dots or whatever in the top map, from Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and so on and so forth. And I've seen some of the stuff that goes on there. So anyway, to put things in perspective, I just want to talk about two of the different types of what we would call wasted gas or gas that isn't effectively utilized today. And these are really flared gas and stranded gas, which between them probably comprise some of the larger amounts of gas that fall into the kind of opportunity or fall to the kind of technology that we can apply our system to. So the first then is flared gas, and globally there's about 150 billion cubic meters, produces 400 million tons of CO2 annually in emissions, and we consider correctly methane, burned methane, to be actually pretty good fuel from a greenhouse gas point of view. Unburned methane's not nearly so good for the environment, as I'm sure you all know. When we talked about stranded gas, and you can see the various areas, and you can see the most sort of guilty parties, in a sense, in the rather small picture of the world over on the right-hand side, where the red areas indicate not only just where the gas is flared, but some approximate idea of the different relative magnitudes of the amount that's flared in those different parts of the world. When we turn to stranded gas, 40% of the world's natural gas reserves are classified as stranded. And again, you guys, you're in the industry, you probably know more than I do about this now, because I'm investing in agriculture these days, but that's another story. But stranded gas, the point is that it's just, for one reason or another, either impossible to connect it by pipeline for geographic or climate reasons at this point, or else it's simply not economic. But there's a hell of a lot of it, for one reason or another, that's stranded around the world. As you say, the estimate right now is somewhere in the region of 40% of that gas. So it corresponds to about 3,000 trillion cubic meters of gas. And again, just to put that in perspective, approximately the entire oil reserves of Saudi Arabia in terms of energy content. So the point here is, no, we wouldn't really want that gas to come on stream all at one time, because the price of gas is low enough anyway. Understood. But the point of the technology we can provide to you is that technology can turn it into a product that has far higher value. So where you may have not billions of cubic meters of stranded gas, but at least the quantities that we can deal with in our units, we can put that stranded gas turn it into a valuable resource that sells for far higher prices than the price of natural gas itself. So we're not really, by this, compounding in any way the natural gas bubble, or whatever you want to call it. We are in fact taking some problem areas where you would either have to flare or re-inject or simply abandon, and creating valuable products from that. And in terms of flaring and venting, these are just a couple of headlines from fairly recently, 2012. And again, those of you on the regulatory side would be more up to date than I am about the specific requirements in the industry here at home, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in BC, that restrict flaring and venting and so on. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about that later in the presentation. If we look again at the global position, though, about 400 million tons of CO2 a year from flared gas, So if we took 100 MCF per day flare stack, which is the typical size that we would target for our MRU, that creates about 2,500 tons of CO2 a year. And at the current conversion rates that we're looking at, our MRU can reduce those emissions by more than half, or approximately half. The reason between the 70 and the half is, there's a lot of other bits and pieces associated with it. So basically, we can bring CO2 emissions down by half. And that's equivalent to about 240 cars off the road at any one time. Another way of looking at this is if we looked at the whole global situation, if we could reduce global reduction by 1%, so we only apply perhaps to 1% of the cases of stranded or vented gas, we'd reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 4 million tons a year, or 1 million cars a year off the road. And what would that take? That would take 1,600 of our 100 MCF a day MRU units to accomplish that. That's a fair-sized deployment, but it's not unthinkable because of the many, many locations that these units could go into. So we expect market adoption to be very broad, very widespread, because it brings economic benefits to many parts of the world in many different situations. And lastly, what are we now? Well, we're in the full design stage of a full-scale field prototype that will run at around 100 MCF per day, which will give us about 10 barrels of liquids per day. We feel the scaling capacity for that unit somewhere between 75 to 250 MCF per day. And if you really want larger volumes, there's an economic point at which this doesn't work, but you can certainly use multiple units, perhaps up to 500 or 1 million MCF per day. Beyond that, you might want to consider other technologies. We might not be competitive. Frankly, we haven't done the economics, we haven't got that. But that's where we are today, and I'm going to now hand over to Dr. Greg Patience, Professor Greg Patience, who can tell you all the gory details of the science behind this. So, and the engineering, of course.